All right, it's 1 o'clock, so I'm sure there will be folks filtering in as they come back from lunch and get off other calls, but I'll go ahead and get started with an introduction to today's session. So, in light of our annual Forum on Aging in Rural Oregon that the Office of Rural Health generally hosts, we're doing virtual learning sessions every month. And this month, we're doing one in partnership with Oregon Department of Human Services, Aging and People with Disabilities, as well as AARP. And I would like to thank them very much for being here today and sharing their expertise with us. Additionally, we have partners who have stuck by us with the forum, and they're listed here: Pacific Source, Oregon Central, Oregon Health Council, St. Charles Health System, Samaritan Health Services, O4AD, again, DHS, Aging and People with Disabilities, Adventist Health Tillamook, Peace Health, GoWe, and Columbia Memorial. Without our partners, these sorts of things just wouldn't be possible, so thank you. A bit of housekeeping as we get started and familiar with the platform here today, WebEx, that we'll be using. The navigation buttons are going to be down at the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse, hover along the bottom, you'll see a row of circular buttons pop up. Your audio and video have been muted as participants, but if you want to participate using the Q&A or chat features, Q&A to ask your questions, chat feature to make general comments, simply click on that little call out, shout out button, the third button on your right there, and that will populate your chat and Q&A boxes to the right of your screen there. Again, please ask your questions using the Q&A feature. We'll save all those questions until the end, and there'll be some time to where I will present your questions back to the speakers today, and they'll dive into those for you. These presentation slides, as well as the recording, will be posted on the Office of Rural Health's Forum on Aging website shortly after this presentation today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So without further ado, I would like to present Billy McNeely Johnson from Adult Protective Services at DHS, and Carmel Prez-Snyder from AARP. They're going to speak to us today about the scams and financial exploitation that are targeting elders, and specifically elders in rural and frontier Oregon. As many of you have probably experienced, as a result of COVID, we're getting all sorts of wacky phishing emails and calls. So they're going to share a bit more about that and how to avoid potential disaster. So thank you so much, and I will turn it over to those two.
Good morning. I guess it's afternoon now. My name is Billy McNeely Johnston. I work for Aging and People with Disabilities. I am the state's financial exploitation specialist. I also teach at the Police Academy. I teach the elder abuse investigations at DPSST, which is where all law enforcement in Oregon has to go through. Prior to my position here, I was a fraud investigator for the state at the employment department. So I did unemployment fraud. And then prior to that, I was in law enforcement. So I have kind of a unique perspective from different sides of the playing field. Carmel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. I'm Carmel Perez-Snyder. I am Associate State Director for AARP Oregon, and I have been leading the fraud work for Oregon for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I worked for AARP in Texas and did the same thing. We're just continually seeing fraud really hitting the older population, particularly in times of COVID when people are isolated. So I'm very glad to be here today to talk to you all.
Great. So when Rose asked me to do this presentation, I have to say it was probably about 9 months ago, and I was very excited because I was going to get to go and present at a conference. So I had to go in and modify my original presentation because of COVID. And I'm going to focus a lot on isolation and loneliness as part of financial exploitation and falling victim to scams. Okay, so in Oregon, the Office of Economic Analysis did a study and they projected the growth population for Oregon seniors between the time of 2010 and 2030 to rise 175%. That is a huge number. In fact, by the time we reach 2030, it's anticipated that there will be more people over the age of 65 than there will be kiddos under the age of 18. And there's a lot that plays into that. The CDC for Oregon put out our statistics as far as longevity, and we came in the top quarter of the United States. So with that and healthcare, people are just living longer. But this is a really huge area that we are monitoring, and we will have to continue to closely monitor because the scammers definitely know that and are adapting, as you guys probably know, now to make the scams about COVID. Carmel, did you have anything?
Yes, actually, particularly in rural areas, I wanted to talk a little bit about the population. We have been hearing and see statistics that show in rural areas the aging population is growing even more rapidly than in the urban areas. And I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody who lives in a rural area. Right now, we're predicting that 1 in 5 people are going to be over the age of 65 by the year 2030, but in most rural areas, that is already the reality, is that 1 in 5 people are older than 65.
Absolutely, and I think that there's a few things that play into that. Cost of living, I think, is very important when we look at that in rural areas. It's just easier to live in some of the more rural areas as far as cost of living. But we'll talk about some hurdles in a little bit as far as rural areas and the challenges that they face. Is there a wolf at the door? So again, I'm going to be talking about scams, which for the most part are stranger. Those are the phone calls that you're going to get. Those are the emails you're going to get. The Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes in the mail that you're going to get, text that's asking you to click a link. And so those are the scammers when we're talking about scammers. When I'm talking about financial exploitation, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides, normally the perpetrators are known to the victim in cases of elder financial abuse, which is a really sad statistic, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Typically, though, when we're looking at perpetrators or the wolf at the door, there normally they fall into 3 categories. The first category is just occasion and opportunity. It just falls in a perpetrator's lap, and they, sometimes when it comes to being a family member and you are overlooking a loved one's bank accounts, sometimes that's a very slippery slope, and sometimes it starts out benign enough in the sense of, well, I'm on mom's accounts and I need an extra $100 this month. I'm going to transfer the $100 into my account and I'll pay her back next month. But then next month there's another bill, and next month there's another bill. And then the monetary amounts normally get higher and higher and higher, unfortunately. The second category that normally perpetrators fall into are those that are it's ultimately desperation. So a lot of addictions, whether it be drug or alcohol, whether it be a gambling addiction, whether it be a shopping addiction, those fall into that category of people just being super desperate to support their habits. And then the very last category that majority of the perpetrators fall into are just predators. These are the scammers. These are the people, and I have a couple of case stories that I'll share throughout the presentation. These are the people that specifically target older adults. They specifically target someone that's vulnerable, and they play on those vulnerabilities. Carmel?
I think, all of the fraud that we deal with at AARP that we get on our helpline often revolves around strangers, those people calling in. But so it's really interesting that it is coming from within a family. But Billy, we were on the Watchdog Wednesday call earlier this week, and one of the questions that someone asked is, how do you convince your parent, because they've heard, our presentations before, about being careful that no one is taking money and not to completely trust a family member is the way they viewed it. So how can someone make sure that, there's like some checks and balances there so the parents are aware that there's more than one person working together to help out with the finances if that needs to be the case?
Sure, and that was a really difficult question. But yes, there are things, and unfortunately, some of the tools that we promote as far as power of attorney or in certain circumstances, a guardianship or a conservatorship, or someone just being added to a bank account, a lot of those are tools used for good. Unfortunately, they're also used as licenses to steal. And when the caller had asked the question, I think the best advice that I could give for that older adult or for those family members that are concerned is to have a couple people watching. If you just assign one person on the bank account to add as a joint account holder, or even to add as just someone that can go in and look to see what's going on, that can sometimes lead to, like I said, that exploitation or that occasion or opportunity or desperation. But if you have perhaps two either trusted family members or two trusted friends, then if you add two people to kind of oversee your account, and again, you don't have to give them permission as far as being able to move the money, but it kind of gives the checks and balances to where they're someone's always watching and they're not all on the same side. So like you said, Carmel, there are checks and balances, but it can be a difficult road to navigate for sure. So I talked about the perpetrators. So for us in Oregon, for financial exploitation, this is what we're looking at. And I talked about family members. So we have the daughters, we have the sons, we have the granddaughters and the grandsons, and then caregivers. So again, it's these people that are in these trusted familial or trusted family relationships that unfortunately are the highest amount of perpetrators for, again, elder financial abuse. When we're looking at scams, and over in the kind of top upper right-hand corner, you can see it says 3.4% are professional cons, so professional con artists. And those are the guys that, are calling you and sending text messages and sending emails telling you that you have inherited, an oil corporation in the Middle East, and all you have to do is pay, a small fee to be able to remove some of the tax lien, and then it's all yours and you're going to be a billionaire. So those are that 3.4. I think that 3.4 we hear of a lot when it comes to social media, when it comes to the media. And I think that we don't care as much about the financial exploitation piece as far as family members and caregivers, because, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, it's embarrassing. Money is a very, very personal subject. I would never, go up and introduce myself and, shake their hand, or I guess now, bump elbows and say, oh, by the way, how much money do you have in your bank account? Instead of something like, oh, and what do you do for a living? It's a very, very personal topic. And I think that people are embarrassed and they're ashamed if they fall victim to exploitation or a scam. Did you want to expand on that, Carmel?
Sure. Recently we talked about on our AARP site about a report by the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that really shows that financial exploitation is really on the increase, and the average loss is $34,000. which is a lot of money. And not all of the reports of financial moves were specific to the age of the victim, but it does show that people ages 80 and older suffered the second highest average loss of $39,000. And those people that really suffered the largest loss were 70 to 79. And usually it is greater if it's someone in this fiduciary role that whether it's a family member or a non-family member, caregiver, the average loss was $57,000, and if it was a family member, the average loss was $42,000. So it's just all these things that we really need to be aware of. And I really like the fact that we talked about having those checks and balances and having somebody else looking over that fiduciary's shoulder.
So looking at who reports, when they're reporting elder financial abuse or when they're reporting scams, this kind of breaks it down. So 3% is anonymous, 1% are attorneys, 9% are friends or neighbors, 4% are healthcare, 3% are home health, 2% are hospital employees, 7% law enforcement, mental health goes to 1%, a doctor would be at 1%, public official, sometimes we get calls from the governor's advocacy office and they want to report something to us, is at 1%, and then other social service agencies are at about 6%. One of the questions that was asked yesterday at the Fraud Watch Network happened to surround the topic of who's reporting and do we think that scams are on the rise. Well, I can tell you that I think that they were on the rise, and I think that they probably still are on the rise. However, because of COVID and because of that isolation and loneliness, the people such as the family members that go into the nursing facilities to visit, or family members that could come into a person's residence, just a personal residence to visit, is going to be way down because of all the isolation that's occurring right now because of how COVID-19 affects older adults. So scams, $36.5 billion a year, and that I believe that is a couple of years old. But I want to take a second and talk about trust abuse. I know that it's the lowest, but it's such a hard impact on the victim. And these are normally the romance scams where, someone sends you a Facebook request, and again, you're isolated and you're lonely, and you click the accept, and now this person can look at your pictures and they can go in and they can chat with you, and it opens up more avenues of communication, such as what is your home telephone number, what's your email address, and these particular instances are heartbreaking because it's so difficult for that older adult to kind of wrap their brains around what is happening or what did happen. There's a lot of times when we go out and talk to a victim of a scam or exploitation, and they just don't want to believe that this actually happened to them, and they really truly believe that that person, we had a case in, it was Marion County, Marion or Polk, and there was a gentleman who had done just that. He had clicked accept on a Facebook friend request of this beautiful woman. He was about 82. She looked to be about in her late 40s, and she had kind of swindled him into thinking that she was in imports and exports, and she lived in England. And the scammers are so amazing in their in what they come up with. It's so outlandish, I cannot make this up, but she had convinced him that she had 2 pirates' chests of literally pirate booty. So gold medallions, rubies, emeralds, crowns, sapphires, and he believed it. And she said, this would be worth so much more in America. I just need to be able to pay the tariff. And that poor gentleman, within 1 week's time, sent her 2 $30,000 wire transfers, but convincing him that this wasn't a real person, even after she stopped contacting him after she got the money, was incredibly difficult. It's a huge betrayal in those particular scams. Did you have anything to add, Carmel?
Yes, that is, one of the worst things. I hate hearing these scams because I've seen it and heard it personally. Recently, the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs sent someone my way. It was a female veteran, and it just broke my heart because she started telling me her story, and I shared exactly. I said, I'm going to stop you, and then I just kind of told her what would happen. They're going to get you to trust them. They're going to tell you they had an emergency. You're going to send them a little bit of money, and then pretty soon it's going to be a bigger emergency, and then they're going to come visit you, but then they're not going to be able to come. And she stopped me. She said, how did you know my story? And I told her it was a scam, and we talked, and I even showed her a check that was online that was, something that was replicable that the scammers use all the time, and explained to her all these things. And even then, she was just like, well, what if this is the love of my life? And I'm turning them over to the police. And it breaks your heart. So, just when you first see someone experiencing that and see those little warning hits, try to, take some action before they have their hooks completely in them. Because as Billy said, it's really hard to convince people.
Okay, so Carmel had thrown out some numbers. In Oregon, we did a study about 5 years ago, well, maybe more like 7 years ago. And DHS put out the Financial Exploitation Oregon data sheet book. And there's a lot of information. It's available online. The average loss in Oregon to an older adult, if they're going to fall victim to financial exploitation back 7 years ago, was at about $25,000. $25,000 is a lot of money, I think, no matter who you are. But it doesn't mean that something as simple as a $20 theft isn't as much or more impactful. If that's the older adult's last $20 or last $100 that they're, got their fingers crossed that they have won some big money, that might mean them not getting their medications for the end of the month or not being able to pay the electricity bill. So for the United States, as far as if we're looking at retirement, so those people that have saved all their lives, the average retirement savings at about 50 years old is $108,000. The average US victim, when they fall victim to a scam that has to do with their retirement, the average loss is about $120,000. And that is a ginormous impact to that older adult, because especially if you're moving past your 60s and your 70s, 80s, and 90s, you don't have the ability to put that money back, to make that money back, to make you whole. So you end up, the impact is so much more than something just as simple as money. It ends up being very, very impactful on their way of life and their health even. Anything, Carmel?
I did. Yes, I want to add a little bit to this. I know that people might be sitting there going, wait a minute, these must be people that are just easily fooled. How does this happen? Well, these con artists are really, really smart, and they can play on people's emotions. ARP did some research and went through hundreds and hundreds of tapes and interviews with con artists who had been arrested, and we put together something called the Con Artist Playbook. And these con artists like to brag about how they did what they did. And one of the things that they say is they like to get people under the ether. And the ether is this heightened emotional state. And they use the trust factor that Billy mentioned earlier. And it's not always just family members. It could be that fiduciary, or you could get that email or that call from the IRS. It's a trusted entity. And sometimes even someone might try to use AARP, or they'll try to use somebody or something that you trust to get in there, and then they kind of ramp up your emotions, whether it's like, we all have a little bit of greed in us, and so they, these phantom riches of you're going to win all this money, or in the case of the gentleman that Billy said, the pirate booty. Who doesn't dream of finding a chest full of pirate booty and, helping their family have this money for the rest of their lives? And so they play on those emotions, and the best way to describe it is to think about the first time you were in love. You weren't really thinking, you were really giddy, and you were making decisions that probably weren't necessarily the best for you at that time. And I think right now during COVID, we're all in this really heightened emotional state anyway, because we're all stressed out, we're all worried, with lots of things going on in our country, and these scamsters are just trying to prey on everyone every chance they get.
Thank you, Carmel. So one of the harder parts is people would ask me, what is the newest scam? What is the latest scam? And I would tell them what the latest scam was, and then I would go back to work the next day and I would check my email, and there would be 10 other new scams that have surfaced. So instead of concentrating on the specific scam du jour right now, although we will talk a little bit about COVID, the Department of Justice, the Consumer Protection Program, through them came up with 6 signs it's a scam. So instead of saying, oh, this is the grandparent scam, or this is the IRS scam, or the utility bill scam, they came up with 6 very simple things. And the first one is contact out of the blue. If you didn't know that you owed the IRS $25,000 and they're calling you and demanding payment by the close of business day, that should raise a red flag. The second red flag should be if there's any claim to emergency. And again, this so drives into familial or grandparent type scams where they do get into that heightened sense of ether and they want to help. The third sign would be requesting personal information. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday with the AARP Watchdog Wednesday, but the scammers work together. And I know that sounds very conspiracy theory, but they truly work together. And probably everyone on this call has somewhat of a file. And it could be one person that called 6 months ago that just needed to verify the address, and you gave it to them, but then you felt a little weird. And then maybe, 2 months after that, you got a call allegedly from your bank at the fraud department, and they just wanted to know your date of birth. So even though you're just giving out little pieces of information, that is being collected, even down to the point of when the scammers call, they make note of what time that victim picks up the telephone, because they know, okay, so when we call at 11:30, she's more likely to pick up, and she picks up and she engages. The fourth sign it's a scam is requiring payment in gift cards or wiring money. I tell people 100% of the time, if someone is asking you to pay your taxes or pay any bill using iTunes gift cards or the Green Dot cards or the prepaid cards, 100% of the time that is a scam. And we try to get that information out, and we did a really good job on getting information out about the wiring. Western Union had start to do training, and the banks do very extensive training with their frontline employees to ask questions about that. But those gift cards and that wiring of money, whether it's overstate or overseas, that money is gone the second it hits that account. The fifth sign would be to keep it a secret. So you've got this incredible investment deal where, the investor advisor wants you to, again, a claim of emergency, It's got to be done by the end of today. Oh, and don't tell any of your friends, because the more people that know about this and try to get in on this, the less money that there will be for you. And then the last one is just the simple, tried and true. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Did you want to add anything, Carmel?
No, I think, those 6 signs it's a scam. These are great tips. If you just keep those 6 things in mind, everything else, that we can say is still important, but these are like the things that'll really make you stop and think, contacted out of the blue, it's urgent, the personal information request, the gift card or wiring, and then, oh, don't tell anyone. And, like your mama told you, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yes. And if you want to go to the website of the Oregon Department of Justice Consumer Protection Program, where they actually have these printed up, laminated, they're beautiful, beautifully done, and you can put them up on your refrigerator. You could hand them out to friends and neighbors, and they could just keep it next to their telephone. You can go onto their website at www.oregonconsumer.gov, and you can actually order those in bulk if you have interest in that. Financial exploitation and scams in general are a vastly underreported problem. A lot of people are afraid. They're afraid to talk about it. They're afraid that if their family, if their sons and daughters find out that they, sent $20,000 via an iTunes gift card to the IRS allegedly, then they're afraid that that family member is going to be concerned enough to start to badger the older adult to perhaps they need to go into a facility. And in my experience working for Adult Protective Services, 99% of the older adults wish to remain in their own homes and live out their lives. They don't want to go into facilities. So a lot of times they might be afraid to say what happened because there might be co-occurring abuse. So the perpetrator might be stealing funds, but also there may be some neglect or some physical abuse or verbal emotional abuse that goes on. And that older adult might be very afraid to talk about that. They might be very afraid of that perpetrator. They may not understand what happened. I know I'm monitoring the time, so I had a case on that. If we have time at the end, I'll go back to that. But there are a lot of times where the older adult has added someone to the joint bank account, just one person, and then they just kind of relinquished all care and control of that account to that quote unquote trusted person. And then the next thing you know, they have 30 cents left in all of their accounts. So they may not even know what happened. They may not be able to verbalize what happened. We had a case in Klamath where there was an elderly woman, and when the OSP detective came with Adult Protective Services in Klamath Falls, they came and were interviewing the victim, who was quite on in her cognitive decline. She had dementia, and didn't have a lot of use of her words, but she kept rubbing her left hand. And the OSP detective took note of it and said, "Is there something wrong with your hand?" And really the only good piece of information that she gave during that interview was just the simple statement, "I miss my ring." And that investigator went to the pawn shops in Klamath Falls, and that ring had been pawned by the victim's daughter, who had told the detective and Adult Protective Services that her mom had given away that ring a long time ago. She pawned it for $500. The ring was worth $16,000. So again, going back to that, why do they do what they do? Occasion, opportunity, perdition. They're ashamed that a family member has mistreated them. Again, it's whether we're talking about financial exploitation or any other type of elder abuse, there's a lot of shame that's involved in that, even for non-older adults. If you are 45 years old and in a domestic violence relationship, you feel shame in that, or they just don't think that police or social service agencies can really do anything. Anything, Carmel?
Yes, I think, that's one of the things we talked about, the shame. And even though you're specifically talking about family members or caregivers, it is also important to note that people are usually embarrassed if they get scammed. It doesn't matter your age. You think, oh gosh, people are going to think I'm not smart. That's why we talk a lot about that con artist playbook. And, these are really smart people who are this is their job, and they find ways. They're coming up with creative ways to scam people every single day. And, as we said yesterday, Billy, wouldn't it be great if they used all this intelligence and creativity for something good instead of something bad? I do want to share the AARP Fraud Watch Network helpline. It's a free resource available to anyone who has fallen victim to a scam or their families, and it's 1-877-908-3360, and I'll type it in the chat in a minute as well. But it's just a way for people, if you don't know where to start to call someone, or you're kind of embarrassed to tell someone that knows you, call the helpline. And there's some trained volunteers and staff, many of who they themselves have experienced fraud, and they can offer support and help find resources for reporting.
So in keeping with the reporting line of thought, so why do people not report? And these are victims themselves. Why do the victims not report it? 34% dealt with it essentially in a matter or way that they just decided it was a personal matter and they were just going to deal with it themselves. 18% indicated that they didn't feel it wasn't important enough to report. 16% thought that the police or social service agency wouldn't be able to help them, so why would they call? 13%, ultimately it's fear. Fear of retribution on the perpetrator or getting the perpetrator in trouble. We see a lot of that on the criminal side. For law enforcement, sometimes it's very difficult to get a victim to participate in elder abuse cases because they're afraid and they don't want to get that family member in trouble. And then 18% just selected other. And so this is from the non-reporting to police in rural areas per the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Vulnerability of the victim. In this time right now with COVID, I cannot stress vulnerability enough. We are all vulnerable right now. I have considered myself a very strong individual throughout life, and I have struggled since working from home. And I have a kiddo that I'm teaching as well, and it's a lot. And it's definitely a lot for someone that doesn't have anyone living with them or checking on them. That loneliness and isolation is the biggest vulnerability that is targeted by scammers, but also by family members. And then there's a list. They might be overly trusting. They might be lonely, which kind of goes with the isolation. They might be depressed. They might have just lost a spouse. The scam artists are so predatory that they will go through obituaries and they will find that older adult's name and number in the white pages, because a lot of older adults still have their number listed, and they will target that victim because of that vulnerability. I unfortunately had spoken with the woman at one of the AARP scam jams, and she said 2 years after her husband of 50 years passed away, she got a telephone call on her cell phone, and she looked down, and it was her deceased husband's phone number that was calling her. So the scam artists are so awful that they can actually, they can change the number. So if you see a Salem number, for instance, for me, that pops up, I might think, oh, that's safe, it's local. Well, they have so many apps now that they can change it to look like you're calling the DA's office, or that the Washington County Sheriff's Office is calling you, or the IRS is calling you. They become that sophisticated to where that also makes a person vulnerable. Carmel?
All of these things are just, it's true and it's sad and it just makes you angry, but there's things that we can do. And one of the things I would encourage everyone to do is call someone you know who is probably isolated and lonely or lost someone. Just call and talk to them, see how they're doing. And then I want to also stress that if you have a college age or younger person in your life, reach out to them as well. One of the things that we have learned through the AARP Fraud Watch Network is that, yes, older adults are often the target and they often lose more money, but younger adults, those millennials, are also targeted by scamsters, and often they actually are scammed more often than older adults. So, reach out to people you know and just touch base every now and then. We have phones and other ways to reach out, even if we can't see each other in person right now.
Thank you, Carmel. And I just wanted to point out some interesting, although very, very sad, similarities to domestic violence in elder abuse cases. So the victim and the perpetrator have an ongoing relationship, and that could even be a scammer because, again, going back to that loneliness and that isolation, sometimes the scammers will groom an older adult and they will call every day and they will be that ear and ask about how their cat's doing and did they pick the tomatoes and how are the roses faring, for that person to talk to groom them specifically. So it could be a familial relationship or a relationship cultivated over the telephone. And we talked about grooming. Perpetrator isolates the victim and creates a sense of dependency. Perpetrator imposes their will upon the victim or convinces the victim that he or she is not able to function alone, which we also see a lot, especially in familial elder abuse cases. So since we're living in the time of COVID, and I know I said that I wasn't going to go into specific scams right now, but I just wanted to throw a couple things on your radar. So COVID, the testing, I think that's fizzling out a little bit, but there are still COVID testing scams, especially on the internet where, they may be advertising on social media, or they may have sent an email saying, you can get tested for free, it's confidential, you just have to provide us your information and we'll let you know if you have COVID. Same with contact tracing. Have to be very, very careful with, again, what personal information we're giving out. There is a current one, it's the stimulus check overpayment scam. And since most of us who would have been receiving that stimulus check either via paper or deposited into our bank account have already received that, now the scammers have glommed onto that. And we've had quite a few cases and calls to where the scammers have called and said you were overpaid. If you don't pay that money back by end of business day, we're sending law enforcement out. We'll send them lights and siren. They're going to pull you out of your house. You're going to slap handcuffs on you, and we're going to drive away with lights and siren, and it's going to be horribly embarrassing for you. And again, that puts that person back into that ether, like, oh my goodness, I don't want that happening. I live in a peaceful neighborhood. So there is that scam. This one is the most disheartening to me. I think it is on all of the Better Business Bureau, Federal Trade Commission, Division of Financial Regulation. This scam is so popular right now. It's a pet adoption scam, and it really caters to COVID and isolation and targets older adults or even people in middle age or younger, where they say, you're working from home now, wouldn't this be a perfect time for you to get a puppy or a kitty? You can just go online on our website. You can select your pet that, you fill out a fake questionnaire, and then you can select your pet. And don't worry, there is no contact delivery. They will bring the pet to you, drive away, and then text you so that you can go get the pet that's been left on the front door. And of course, they've paid $500, $750, $2,000 for, this animal, and there is no animal. False products. Especially at the beginning, there was lotions and there was inhalers and diffusers that were being purported to protect from COVID or even get rid of COVID. I even saw there was a pair of socks that were being marketed that were allegedly pulling the COVID toxins out of the bottom of your feet. And then you could just wash the pair of socks, and in case you were exposed again, you could reuse them. So again, they come up with all sorts of things. And then I don't know about you guys, but for me, when COVID hit, my scam calls went down at about end of March. They went down, and as of about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they have shot back up. And especially that Social Security, there's criminal activity on your account. We have an arrest warrant. You need to call us and pay your bail, or else we're going to send someone. But those Social Security calls have amped way, way back up, unfortunately. Anything, Carmel?
We've seen reports, even from insurance companies have had issued reports saying that scammers are really targeting the rural areas to offer, because oftentimes they don't have the drive-up testing that maybe somebody in an urban area might have. So they offer a test kit for COVID. And in exchange for that, they get personal information such as health insurance information, and then the scammer will use all that information to build false medical claims, or they'll just offer, miracle cures, as you mentioned, but they're targeting people that they know maybe don't have access to testing, and they're trying to get them to part with their personal information.
And that's a perfect segue into the next slide, rural problems. I think that even urban problems right now reflect a lot of these because of COVID-19. Resources are a really big deficit and big issue right now. And the accessibility of those resources, Meals on Wheels, or the chariot bus coming to take someone to go grocery shopping, or to go play bingo, or to go to church. Those accessibility resources have been strongly pulled back, I believe, during COVID-19 right now, because people are nervous and scared. Inadequacies of the existing healthcare treatment. And, there's been a lot of commercials on TV recently where they're saying, don't, I can't remember the verbiage, but it was basically like, don't accidentally die by not going to the emergency room because you have symptoms of something else. Like maybe you're having symptoms that could represent a heart attack or a stroke or some other major health issue, and people are afraid to go to the doctors right now. Inadequacies for support systems for caregivers. We see a lot of caregiver stress, as I'm sure all of you do as well. It is a real thing. Through Adult Protective Services, there is respite options that are available that can bring someone in to take care of that older adult if they need, and that way that son or daughter or even spouse that's caring for them can go out and have a day to, now these days we can't go to the movies or the spa, but traditionally, go to the grocery store, get some errands done. And then minorities, and Carmel might touch on this as well, trying to get the word out about fraud or about elder abuse. The English as a second language can definitely be a barrier. And I know that AARP has actually done scam jams in Spanish. Is that right, Carmel?
Well, we have some coming up. We have a September 23rd. We're actually doing one of our Watchdog Wednesdays on Facebook Live, and you can see that at 10 a.m. on the 23rd at facebook.com/AARP Oregon, and we'll have some information, and it'll be in bilingual, and just trying to get information out. And any information that we provide in English as well as is available on our website in Spanish. You just have to click the Español. And we also have different Asian languages, and we try to really get the word out to different people because this is so prevalent, and these scammers will find ways to scam people.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to have to, I think, fly through these last slides if we're going to leave any room for questions. Reporting issues in rural areas, especially in small towns, and especially in towns where that particular family has lived for generations. This is a problem. People don't want to report the abusers, and they don't. Other family members or professionals may not want to report because they may be acquainted or known to law enforcement or healthcare professionals or other reporters. They may not think that what they have to say would actually be taken seriously. Confidentiality might not be maintained. So for instance, if you're in a very small town and your son or daughter grew up with the town, chief or sheriff, and now all of a sudden that son or daughter is perpetrating some sort of abuse, then the whole confidentiality of reporting this happened to me when that friend reconnects with the person that they went to school with can be, I think, a big hurdle. Reputations will be damaged. Like there's sometimes where my daughter chastises me about something, and because we're in public and I'm dancing or some other thing, she's like, "Mom, stop." And I'm like, they're never going to see me again, who cares? But in small towns and in rural areas, you see these same people every day. They're very well known to you, so they don't want that reputation damaged. And then it goes back to what we've kind of said throughout the whole webinar is they don't want to make it worse. Tribal specific issues for Oregon, judicial authority for crimes of abuse by non-tribal people on tribal lands has been historically limited. So there are resources that are available through different tribes. However, there's also perpetrators that know. There's one in Oregon that went through, it was complained on the Better Business Bureau's website. There was an individual who he had a money loan, paycheck type operation going, and he was charging, I believe it was like 210% upcharge. And they had a really hard time getting at that person because he wasn't a tribal member, but he was operating on tribal lands, and there wasn't, there wasn't a lot of communication going out about what was happening. Financial institutions are losing to $1 billion every year. So a couple of years ago, the Oregon Bankers Association, who has been a partner with DHS Aging and People with Disability for a very, very long time, they basically, they came up with House Bill 2622. And this is such a big, helpful tool for people to know about. It authorizes financial institutions to refuse certain financial transactions when they believe that financial exploitation of a vulnerable person either has occurred, is occurring, or might occur in the future. So when would it be used? When a financial institution reasonably believes, so the financial institution themselves can take this upon themselves to put a hold, or if they receive information from the Department of Human Services, Aging and People with Disability, or law enforcement, or the district attorney's office, and in any of those entities reasonably believe that financial exploitation is occurring, then pending an investigation by the financial institution, APS, law enforcement, or DA's office, the financial institution has the capability of refusing transactions with or involving that vulnerable person, refusing to permit the withdrawal or disbursement of funds in the account. It can prevent a change of ownership of the account, can prevent a transfer of funds from the vulnerable person's account to an account held wholly or partially by another, and then refuse to comply with instructions given to the financial institution by a power of attorney signed or purported to have been signed. Power of attorney abuse, I could do a whole hour on, so I will just let you know power of attorney abuse in financial elder abuse cases happens all the time. And that when I was talking earlier about that 6 signs it's a scam, this is what it would look like if you go on the OregonConsumer.gov's website. you can call the fraud hotline and talk to someone there. You can report a do not call violation. There's free fraud prevention training. You can search a complaint database. You can file a complaint online. And then there's also an area where you can go in and order those bulk pamphlets of 6 signs it's a scam. Carmel?
Thank you, Billy. And I also want to encourage people to check out the Fraud Watch Network online. It's www.aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork. You can sign up for fraud alerts that'll tell you about frauds that are specifically in your area. There's also a scam tracking map that you can click on, different little dots on the map that'll tell you what scams are going on in your area so you can be aware. And it offers tips and resources. There's a podcast called the Perfect Scam Podcast that really highlights a lot of different things that are going on across the country. And as we both, Billy and I have mentioned, is we do Watchdog Wednesday every other Wednesday on our Facebook Live, and that's at facebook.com/AARP Oregon, and it's 10 a.m. on every other Wednesday. And you can catch the ones that you've missed. They stay on the website, so you can always go on Facebook and watch those. And then our helpline at 877-908-3360. And next slide. This is just a map that I was talking about. As you can see, you can get click on that. And there is a question in the Q&A, Billy, that I want to go ahead and mention. And Jillian had a question about how to stop all the scam mails that she was getting. And you can contact the post office and fill out a card and ask them to stop mail solicitations. If it's do not call, you can contact the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and that's a real easy website. It's www.ftc.gov, and they have a lot of the fraud information on there as well, latest frauds. You can sign up for alerts with them as well. And, you know, slam the scam. Don't give out your Medicare number. Social Security benefits are still being paid. Don't believe scammers that tell you that they can help you. The U.S. Census is never going to ask you for your full Social Security number, bank account, or credit card information. Ensure you have the strong passwords and that you have different passwords and not using the same one you used 20 years ago when you opened your bank account. The IRS will not call you, text you, or email you. And, you know, just ignore online offers for coronavirus vaccinations. If it's somebody you don't know and they're calling you, don't answer the phone and don't click on anything in an email from someone you don't know. I had an email recently from a friend that said, hey, check this out. And I know my friend is never going to send me something and say, check this out without telling me what it is. So I didn't click on it. And instead I called them and said, did you send me this? And they had not. So, you know, just be wary of what you are doing. Billy has put up a couple of places of where to report elder abuse. The reporting hotline is 1-855-503-SAFE. And the DHS branches, and then also, again, the Fraud Watch helpline. And Billy, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, that elder abuse reporting hotline is also abuse for all types of abuse throughout Oregon. That is what we call our safe line. So anybody can call in and report child abuse. They can report elder abuse. They can report abuse of someone that has a developmental disability. This is the one main abuse reporting hotline that will get you to the correct office that would be doing the investigation to screen in that information to see if it falls in their jurisdiction. But again, we call that the safe line, 1-855-503-SAFE. And Rose, did we have any questions? Oh.
Yeah, I have one in here for you real quick before we hop off. We're almost at the top of the hour. One question, are scammers usually working as individuals, or are they working as a coordinated group of organized criminals?
I'll take that, Billy, to start. So when I started working with the Fraud Watch Network, I had never heard of boiler rooms. A boiler room is a call center, and this is a call center that scammers come together, and they have a call center, and they're sharing information, so they're working together. And as Billy had mentioned earlier, they may call you 1 month asking you for one little bit of information, and then they'll call you again. And Billy, did you want to add to that?
Nope, just they absolutely work together, like I had mentioned earlier, and that just that little pieces of information, like when you answer the phone, if you engage, if you want to press 1 to be removed from the list, don't press any buttons. Don't press any buttons, because sometimes they'll remove you from their list, but then they'll sell your information to 30 other scam artists.
Yeah, just hang up.
Just hang up.
Thank you so much, ladies. That was a fast and furious overview, and it's disheartening, but also very good to be informed. But it's sad to know that these sorts of things are happening so much and so often this day and age. I am curious, do you all experience more in the rural communities versus urban? Is there a difference between the two?
I would say there's different types sometimes of scams that we see in the rural areas, but those scammers are everywhere. I mean, they're going to definitely go to the cities where there's more people, but they really focus on the isolation factor. So you might see different types of scams in the rural area where they're doing that, the trust abuse, where they're getting you to trust them because it's a different situation there. So.
Great. Then you both mentioned the Con Artist Playbook. Is there a link or a website that that folks can access that?
Sure. If you go to www.aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork, we have it online, and you can download it. If you can't download it, you can call the helpline, and they will mail one to you.
Great. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour and a couple minutes over. I want to thank both Carmel and Billy for joining us today to present such timely and useful information. I wish I could keep you both here for another hour or so and hear some of those really intriguing stories that are going on out in our communities, but we'll have to schedule another event. I appreciate your expertise and encourage everybody to join the Scam Jam calls and other resources that were discussed today. I will reach out to you all and share the links and information if you weren't able to catch it. These slides will be posted on our website so you can access them again, and the recording will be there as well once we get it all cleaned up and publishable. So thank you for joining us, and have a lovely remainder of your day, everyone.